Rock and roll, baby. Welcome back to this episode of By the Wayside. I am your host, Jordan Middlebrook. Of course, my name's going to pop up. On this episode today, we're going to be speaking with comic book writer Mike Schwartz. We're, of course, going to have an Omar Recommends and all sorts of really fun things, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back. I have to say, the crisp air and one of my mustache hairs is tickling my nose. It's driving me bonkers today. The crisp air of the Ontario weather is one of my favorite things. I'm not a summer guy. I'm a fall guy sort of just for the colors and such. Spring is gross, disgusting. I'm a winter guy. That's why the winter time is the best. Of course, it's not good for the old ticker. On today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Mike Schwartz, who I mentioned off the top of the show. But Mike Schwartz, we'll get into it on his segment. He also hosts a podcast. But the reason why I bring that up, so when I start moving things out of the way, you know that I got something cool that I want to talk about. Back in the 90s, there's a weird light hitting my face there. I'm gonna fix that right on camera. In the 90s, I was a comic book collector. I had stopped for a little while. To keep myself abreast of what was happening in the comics universe, I collected a magazine called Wizard, The Guide to Comics. But I wanted to show you, I have a massive collection of these magazines. This is about half a dozen. This is like a time capsule to what the comics world was or could potentially still be because of, how things come back, resurgence of things. So I'm going to show you. So this, of course, is Wizard number 51 with Magneto on the cover. Magneto is a big X-Men villain. Okay. So this is actually quite, it's like the now. So Wizard 35. This actually, what year was this one? Wizard 35 was 1994, Wolverine on the cover. And we know that Wolverine is played to a T perfectly by Hugh Jackman. There's a new Batman movie coming out with Christian Bale. So it's a 2008? 2005. Holy smokes. 2005. They were talking about Batman in 2005. Okay, so it seems like there's a lot of Marvel covers. It seems that I had a preference, Marvel covers. So of course, Spider-Man and Wolverine. You remember the first Spider-Man movie directed by Sam Raimi, one of my favorite directors, starring Tobey Maguire, and there's Hugh Jackman playing Wolverine in the first X-Men movie. So again, like I said, Kelsey Grammer, who was the best Beast. This was in the 2000s, right? 2006. Okay, so here's some art. Some more art. Superman. This is Ed McGuinness Superman. This is a great Superman. This was a great Superman time. I think this was the 90s as well. Oh, 1999. October 1999. So when you open it up, excuse me for my what do you call that? So when you open it up, it's just like it's a look back on what comic books were. Okay, of course. So how about this Wizard? Spider-Man, Wolverine, Daredevil. These are all Marvel properties now. Like they're all making, like there's a Daredevil TV show. There's been movies about them. There's Spider-Man. I mean, there's countless Spider-Man. Who's your favorite Spider-Man? I'm going to throw the email up. I want you to send me a distinct message on Instagram or email me with who your favorite Spider-Man is. And if it's not Tobey Maguire, then don't bother sending me any messages. In Wolverine, there's only one Wolverine. It's Hugh Jackman, and I will take that to the grave. I just grabbed a smattering of books from my collection at my house. Now is the time for you to be thinking about what to get somebody, that loved one something fun for, like Valentine's Day. Is it Valentine's or Valentine? There's no one here right now. I can't ask them that question. Oh, I could probably ask that question. Are you ready for this? Let's do this. So I still got my mic on. We're doing a little bit of walking into the here. Hey, Google, is it Valentine or Valentine's Day? Google is saying that it's St. Valentine, so it's Valentine Day. No, it's Valentine's Day. I walked away. I didn't even give it the opportunity to finish the thing because I'm like, hey, Google. Oh, I'm like, hey, individual who runs the Google, I got a TV show / internet show to do. I can't stand around waiting for you to look at Wikipedia.com that says, since it's named after St. Valentine. My goodness. Come on, Google, get with the program here. I just realized that I was going to have a sip of coffee. There's nothing in here. Boo on me. Stick around. I got to get myself a coffee and or hot chocolate here from Wayside Comics. Stick around because right after this, I'm going to be speaking with Mike Schwartz, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of fun things. And don't go anywhere. And welcome back to this episode of By the Wayside. On today's... Nope, it's not the opening. It's the Mike Schwartz segment. Well, I spoiled it now. I said his name. With me today, comic book writer, screenplay writer, and podcaster, Michael Schwartz. Thank you very much for coming in today and speaking with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to adjust my chair.
Yeah,
I got a chair problem, too.
No Here, I'll do the same.
Oh, I feel so much better now. I feel so much better now. Now I'm like parallel with the table. This is one of those wacky things on a Saturday morning, which is, we're recording, of course, on a Saturday morning here at Wayside Comics. Again, thank you. I know that sometimes finding the time to do it's not an extracurricular activity, but it's like a creative curricular. Here on By the Wayside, we just make up as many words as we possibly can. And I want to get right into the questions.
Okay.
Because I don't want to lose that spirit of me rifling right into the segment, getting you laughing, because that's what makes me the happiest the most. Mike.
Okay.
You write comics, you write movies. What's the difference between writing a screenplay for a movie and or a multi-issue comic book?
I would say the biggest difference is that in a screenplay, I don't describe everything. Like, I'm not telling the director which camera angles to use. I'm not telling the director what a certain room has to look like unless it's important to the story. In a comic, I have to write everything. I have to describe every panel, how many panels, what's being shown in each. I'm sure there's a lot of writers in comics that have worked with artists a long time where they have like a shorthand.
Yeah.
But I think in comics, there's far more direction. You kind of have to be like the director and the writer.
Makes sense.
Whereas in feature film screenwriting, you're just the writer. You're just
dialogue.
Dialogue, yeah.
Well,
not just dialogue, also just setting the scene.
Oh, okay.
You set the scene, but you don't... I'm not like... Here, I wouldn't describe every detail. I let like the production designer or whatever come up with that. But in the comic, I think you have to give a bit more description.
Okay, yeah.
So that they know what to draw. Yeah.
That's interesting because in your case as a comic book writer, it would be Mike walks into a dark comic book shop that is also the setting for a web show / television show, and the wall is lined with comic books.
Yes.
The hero looks angry. But in a screenplay, you would write... Dude walks into a bar.
I may do that.
For what? For
a screenplay.
Okay.
But for a comic, I would be like, panel 1, close up on character's face.
Very detailed.
Yes. Panel 2, we now see the whole shop. This is what's aligning the walls.
So it is more than a writer. I guess director is a very good way of putting it. Production, crew, director, because you would write in a sound effect as well.
Oh yeah, I do SFX and then put whatever. Sometimes the letterer though in a comic has better ideas for what the sound effect should be, but I will put in sound effects. Sometimes they'll add sound effects if I've missed it.
I got you.
Yeah.
So out of those two, writing comic books and writing movies / screenplays, what's more satisfying?
I think comic books, I have to say.
Yeah?
But I think it's a multi-part answer in a way, because with writing a movie, I've written over a dozen movies, and I have 2 produced. Okay? So, and it's not like, I've written more movies than that, but those are the ones I've been paid to write. So you get paid to write a lot of movies that never get made because the producers can't find the financing, or they had the financing, but then, I don't know, someone pulls out or whatever. In comic books, comics are weird too, because a lot of people rely on pitching a comic and then hoping that publisher will pay for the artist's work and pay you a page rate. But a lot of comics, especially Image Comics or my comic, it's self-funded.
Yeah. So
like I fund the comic, but that also means I get to see the material faster. I actually get to see it made, and that was armored, which we'll get to. I'm spoiling.
Don't step on my questions. Mike, I know that I've said this in the past, but I always let my guests know what I'm going to ask ahead of time because I don't want to be the kind of host that's just like, tell me your childhood trauma. Like I don't want to be that person. There is something in knowing what you're being asked because it allows you to feel more relaxed. You're not on your toes. I want to create an inviting environment here. That's why you would mention that your comic book Armor. You know what? Let's get right into it.
Oh boy.
Your current project, your comic book Armored.
Yes.
Can you describe it in your own words?
So it is a story about a boy who he's lost his parents 2 years prior. They've disappeared. He doesn't know where they are, and he's recently been adopted by a couple who also lost their child 2 years prior. So their child died under very mysterious circumstances. Few of the boy's friends know and saw that he was killed by a monster of some kind at this old castle. This book is not set in Canada. I should mention that.
All right.
It's not Castle Loma that he died at.
In the middle of Toronto. This kid dies in Toronto.
Exactly. So when this boy Andy is adopted by this new couple, they're a bit strange, but he also feels like he's being replaced in a way. But he's also a very curious kid because he wants to know what happened to his parents. Like he's obsessive about it. But he then becomes obsessive about their child and what happened to him. And he finds out this boy died at this castle, and he goes to the castle and he finds this little amulet thing, or I don't know what people call it, different things, but this pendant, and he presses this button and this armor basically, envelopes him like Iron Man.
Oh, right on. Yes, yes.
This armor has powers, but there's one catch. It is being haunted by the knight that used to wear the armor hundreds of years prior, and he has no memory. He's a goofball. And the two basically have to team up to find out what this monster was that killed the child. And also they have, he also has to train the boy to use the armor because there's something bigger coming, he believes. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery series. It's a bit of a fantasy series. It's a little teen drama in there.
Not the fantasy part, but we've all been teens at some point, so I could see how your teen trauma can be translated into your comic book.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll be right back with more with Mike Schwartz right after this. I'm Jordan Middlebrook, and I am the host of By the Wayside. It's a show that wants to introduce you to creative people. I encourage you to find us on Rogers TV and on the internet at waysideshow.com. Mike, Armored, your comic book.
Yep.
Is this a story that you've always had, or is it sort of something that you woke up one morning and went, this idea?
It's such a tough question because sometimes ideas pop up in your head and you're like, this would make a great story. I don't know what it is. I had this idea, I think shortly after having my son. I was watching a lot of kids cartoons from my childhood, and this idea popped in, and it was a medieval suit of armor, or a suit of armor, and it was being haunted by a ghost.
That's one of my favorite aspects of the entire story. It's the mentor-mentee idea.
Yeah.
But it's the ghost part. I really dig the idea. It's an original idea that kind of takes the genre and gives it a little twist.
Yes.
And I think that's what really caught me.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, no problem. I had said off camera that when I told you that I enjoyed Armored, I wasn't blowing smoke up your beehole. It reaches my sensibilities of, I like old characters. Mm-hmm. This is a thing if you want to write another story to catch my attention.
Yep.
I like old man characters. I like when kids are trained by old men. This sounded kind of weird. But there's a ghost in it. But it's an original take on a story that sometimes doesn't have originality, but yours does.
Yeah, what's interesting is that it was shortly after I came up with the idea. I would tell my wife, I'd be like, listen, I have this idea, and I'd tell her it's a kid with armor and a haunted ghost, and I would always say, it's kind of like the Aladdin story, but different, right? Right, in a way. Yes. And I'm like, that's kind of what it is. And Aladdin, he gets wishes. There's no wishes. But it is wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right? What kid wouldn't want to find a powerful suit of armor and your best friend is a ghost that can,
Yeah.
get into places and stuff. So
Mike, this is the third time I've mentioned it. It sounds a lot like teen trauma. You are you digging deep into the well of when you were a teen that you wish that the world would just leave you alone? Welcome to my therapy session. And the armor would encapsulate you and no one could bug you, but you are now more powerful than every single person around you. And that ghost is the person that you've loved the most, but has left your life. Not necessarily dead, but it could be that mentor, that teacher that was there for you at some point in your life when you absolutely needed it.
You are really making me think deep into the past.
So while we're doing this episode, which really is crazy, a whole bunch of artists are showing up here at Wasted Comes. Just hold on a second. Hey everybody, come on in. You can chill here or you can go away. No, you don't have to go away. You're more than welcome to chill here. It's all good. I'm keeping that in. That's television. Folks.
Yeah, that's television.
That's television.
All right. I do want to elaborate though.
Yeah, I really got caught right in the middle of that trauma story.
Yeah, I do a little bit. I may not be dealing with that trauma necessarily, but when I came to developing the character and the story, I thought, what does this armor represent? And to me, it was a metaphor for the trauma the child had gone through in the story. And in order to get over that loss of his parents, because he's quite obsessed with finding them and hoping that they're still alive, he needs to shed not only the real armor in some ways, as if you read the whole story, he also has to get rid of that thing that's preventing him from moving on.
Yeah.
This
is quite the therapy session. This is pretty heavy. Pretty heavy for a Saturday morning.
I have also another interesting story. I don't want to derail you at all,
I want to hear it all.
But because this idea had been sitting a while, there was a point where I was working at an animation studio, and they were looking for ideas for Jackie Chan. Because they were working with him on a movie, and they were like, we need more ideas for Jackie Chan animated movies. And I pitched a version of this, which is actually, you're going to see that story in the second arc of Armored. So like the first arc of Armored is 5 comic books, which will be a graphic novel, and then the second will be another 5 chapters. And that you'll see that story, the Jackie Chan thing cool. I pitched I like that. As the second story. Yeah.
I've told the story before, but back in the 90s, Mark Silvestri, I believe it was Mark Silvestri, had tried to pitch a movie about a bunch of like Suicide Squad type guys. They were commissioned to go into hell.
Okay, yeah.
And of course they would never come out. So he tried to pitch that movie in Hollywood and no one was biting. And he said, you know what? I'm going to make a comic book. And he ended up making it into a comic book. I think it was called Inferno. I could be wrong.
That sounds familiar. That sounds right.
It might have just been a fever dream.
Okay. But then I'm what is it called when I've taken on your fever dream?
Insane?
Yeah, that's it.
At the beginning of this segment, when I introduced you, I had mentioned podcaster.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. We've been doing a lot of talking. It's like we've been here all day talking about all these amazing things. Can you? I got to read what I wrote and I'm a professional. Can you tell me about the show that you are a part of, or / host?
Yeah, so I'm a new addition to this podcast called Wizards, the Podcast Guide to Comics. And it is a podcast that re-examines the comic book boom of the 90s, but through the pages of Wizard magazine.
Which was the most popular magazine at the time.
Yeah, most, I think, comic book readers became comic book fans because of Wizard. Or if you were a comic book fan, you were definitely reading Wizard magazine. And what's really cool about doing the podcast, so I'm new to it. I've only been doing it a year, but and now we've been doing it the host I do it with, Adam Pope, he's been doing it for 5 years with various co-hosts, but I've been doing it for a year with him. And what's really fun is it's really a history lesson into comic books of the 90s. We just hit our 100th issue of the magazine, so now we're into the 2000s.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The 90s was quite the time for comic books, and I know that Wizard was, well, they were sort of like you had said. I had said off the top of the show that I started reading in like '92, and I collected up until they shut down, which I believe was, don't answer it just yet, I want to say 2015. How close am I? Do you know the answer to that?
I actually don't. Adam would be ashamed of me right now. I think it's 20. Green Lantern is on the cover, I believe. Ryan Reynolds.
Interesting.
So
interesting.
It's like 235 issues. That I know.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So we'll have maybe that information will pop up on the screen right here. The Wizard ended in so and so and so.
Or just listen to the podcast for the next 5 years.
We'll get there. They'll get there eventually. They'll get there. Well, then that kind of answers my question: is what is it about Wizard that makes it great for podcast content?
I think it's a history lesson. Yeah. Like I said, like I if you don't read comics now, but you used to, it's a great opportunity to go back and, it's kind of nostalgia trip.
Well, like I had said, like I had showed you, these were in the beginning of the episode, but like I had showed you is I just grabbed a handful off my shelf.
For anyone that didn't read it or know what we're talking about.
It's this look book, at that. Or magazine.
This is it, yeah.
Now mine are mostly the photo ones, which, like the
movie cover.
Yeah. Because they were direct market, so usually it was like a supermarket, I guess I would have picked it up at, not at a comic book shop. So the telling where I shopped was quite apparent. Mike, I can't thank you enough for, again, taking the time speaking with me today. And I look forward to reading more Armored and seeing where that takes us. And I encourage everyone to find the movies that you wrote. It's like a Where's Waldo of movies that Mike Schwartz wrote. Stick around because we have lots more coming up in this episode of By the Wayside. Welcome back to this episode of By the Wayside. If you've been watching this show, you know that I've mentioned in the past that sometimes we do episodes out of order on different days. I'll talk to a creator one day. We'll do an Omar Recommends another day. I'll even do an opening on another day. So that explains why I've got a bump on my head. There's a nice little scab there. And I'm wearing a winter jacket so that you know that it's a different time. I don't know. It's the Omar Recommends segment, and I know he's around here somewhere. Omar's around here. Omar, do you have something to recommend?
I do. It wouldn't be Omar Recommends without a recommend.
You know what? Joke never gets old.
Never does.
What do you got for us today, Omar?
Today, what I have for you is something special. So I have The Fade Out by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. So Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are my favorite creative team in comics. I will read anything that they write, and it is a day one read for me. I will put time aside or, be up reading till 2 a.m. if I have to. But like anything they put out, I have to read. Okay?
I'm going to stop you for a quick second. What? On an episode before, you had mentioned that you can't find 3 hours to watch Interstellar, but you can find 3 hours to read an Ed Brubaker.
It doesn't take me 3 hours to read them.
You said you put time aside, so I'm just kind of...
I will.
Yeah, I don't know where your priorities lie anymore. I'm so lost. Omar, tell me more about The Fade Out by Ed Brubaker.
The judgment on this guy.
Brubaker or Brubaker?
Brubaker.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Omar Recommends.
I don't think I don't even know if there's people out there called Brubaker.
I don't know. What's Jason Lapudui up to?
I'm just going to judge you for a minute.
I'm going to give him a call. See,
all right.
Hey, Jason, what's up?
After hijacking the segment, let's get back to it. So The Fade Out is about the Hollywood system back in the 50s. So the interesting thing about this is Ed Brubaker's grandfather was actually in the Hollywood system back in the day. He was a writer for the big studios. So if you don't know anything about Hollywood back in the day, the big studios were kind of like their own countries. They rope actors into like very lengthy contracts, and they could only work for that particular studio. They had their own security forces. They had their own private investigations. It was very much like the Vatican. Like they were very, very close knit for what happened in them. So The Fade Out, and it deals with a lot of real people that go in and out of The Fade Out as well. Dashiell Hammett, James Dean, things like that.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, essentially the premise of the story. So Brubaker and Phillips are predominantly known for their crime fiction stories, and this one touches on a murdered young actress from one of the studios, and the investigation that goes into what happened to her. And amidst that, there's also all the daily lives of all these other people who were around her or just like worked in that same studio. Very topical with things that have happened in recent years with like Harvey Weinstein and things like that. But yeah, it's a super interesting look at old Hollywood and how it functioned,
Cool.
with some very some just majestic artwork and the words from Brubaker. He writes dialogue and characters like nobody else. You can just who's who, and you can just get lost in these sorts of things. But very very cool style from Sean Phillips and what they do. But yeah, it's just wonderful neo noir at its best, and I highly highly recommend it. It won an Eisner when it came out. It was one of the best graphic novels at the time.
Award-winning.
It's an award-winning graphic novel. That's right.
Awesome.
But I highly, highly recommend The Fade Out by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Get lost in this world and take a bit of a history trip to old Hollywood.
I like when creators, not necessarily comic creators, like they do it in movies as well, where they'll take real life scenarios and real life worlds and they'll sort of weave in, it's not false narrative, alternate history, when they do an alternate history.
Like I said, the cool thing about this is that because Brubaker's grandfather was in that system, he actually bases a lot of what happens in the book on conversations with his grandfather or notes and like journal entries and stuff like that.
Very cool.
So he kind of built this fake history around all the reality of what was happening at the time. So it's very, very cool. And like I said, a very, very neat insight into how things work. Even like they go into little things like how they would postulate for ads or how they would choose people from, like restaurants or how they wanted to move people up or what you had to do to go into. It's just a really, really well written historical fiction about what was happening at the time, and really gives you this wonderful insight into the Hollywood system. And like I said, I always say it every time: a good book, good graphic novel will transport you to that era and make you lose yourself in whatever you're reading. And that's very much what they always do, and they achieve it
perfectly.
Yeah, with flying colors.
Oh, awesome! And I like the flying colors. I don't think you've ever used those words on episodes or segments of By the Wayside and Omar Recommend segments. This is a great recommend, Omar. Thank you very much.
Check it out.
Stick around. We have a little bit more in this episode. Omar, you say your thing?
Oh, we'll catch you by the wayside.
And he will. Don't go anywhere. Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. I got distracted by something. My name is Jordan Millbrook. I'm your host. I think I said that once or twice during the course of this episode. I want to thank you for joining me here on today's episode of By the Wayside. I want to thank all of my guests, and I want to thank all of the really fun people that helped put this episode together. It actually created like a resurgence in my noodle about how I want to go back through all of my Wizard magazines and see what kind of funny jokes existed. What was appropriate back then but is not appropriate right now because the world was totally different in the 90s. That's just the way of the world, right? It just happens. I want to thank the guests. Don't forget to check all the social media handles that you're seeing that's popping up on the screen as I'm talking. Instagram. Like I said, there's a TikTok somewhere here. I also realized that I sometimes forget that we have a Facebook page. So if you're following us on at waysideshow.com, or if you happen to see us on television, we have a Facebook page. You can, of course, go there. You can message me. You could watch some reels that pop up. You can see some goofy pictures that I usually post. All the uncut episodes are at waysideshow.com. I thank you very much for supporting me and everyone here at By the Wayside. I'm your host, Jordan Millbrook, and I will catch you by the wayside. By the wayside. That was fun. All right, we're going to do this. This is the Mike Schwartz episode. Got all my notes. I'm all ready to go. Rock and roll, baby.